Hi, you're listening to What If I'm Right? And I'm your host, Ian Heller. Today, what I want to talk about is how K-12 education has really just failed our students and, quite frankly, our culture. And it's not because I have anything negative to say about teachers. I'm a professor. My wife is a professor. We both have taught most of our lives. So I have a huge amount of respect for teachers. In fact, I really think that when people walk around and they say, when they see somebody who's in the Army or the Navy or the Marines or the Air Force, and they say, thank you for your service, honestly, that's what I think people should be saying to people who teach. Teachers, thank you for your service. It's a hard job. We don't pay you enough, and we don't give you enough support. So thank you for your service. You are training our future. Thank you. Okay, I know that's not going to work, but I think it's valid. And yet I see the K-12 education system as failing our culture and our kids. Not because it's trying to do anything negative, and I don't think that this is an intentional effort. On the other hand, I think that we really know a lot more than we like to admit about how to fix it. So we have seen this over the last, 20 years or thereabouts. We looked at our education and seen our children do worse and worse and worse in comparison with other industrialized nations, specifically with respect to things like science, technology, English, mathematics, STEM. And for those of us who really understand the value of the arts, STEAM, science, technology, education, English, arts, and math. And the arts absolutely are part of the most fundamental thing to prepare our brains to learn all the other stuff, whether it's engineering or math or technology. Math helps. Arts help. But that's not where our problem is. That's where we look at the results and we say, oh my goodness, we better start teaching math and science and technology better. Except then we start teaching our children to pass a test rather than to learn. And that never works. I will posit one thing to you as just so fundamentally illogical about our system that I don't care where you stand politically or culturally. It makes no sense. We live in what is known as a democratic republic, and our form of our economic base, the way our economy works, is through capitalism. So basically, the two most fundamental definitions of what it is to be an American is to be a member of a democratic republic political system in a capitalist economic system. That's just two things, okay? Two things. One is understanding how government works. Why do we need to understand how government works? Because the beginning of our Constitution says we the people, which means that we, in our democratic republic, are the ones who select representatives to be our government. That's what a democratic republic is. A strict democracy simply means we all vote on everything. Well, that's nutty. Can you imagine voting on every single thing that a country of 340 million people plus trillions of dollars of economic movement, that somehow we're going to vote on all that stuff? I don't know enough about that stuff to vote on everything. I elect with you a representative to learn about that stuff, to become an expert, and they represent us. That's the republic side of it. We are all democratic Republicans. We vote as a democracy for representatives who represent us in a republic, democratic Republicans. It's an old Jeffersonian political party. And yet, we don't teach our children civics. Civics. You know what civics is? I bet a lot of you don't. Civics is learning how the government works. Can you imagine somebody saying, "Welcome to the company. What do you know anything? Let's say you just got hired by, I don't know, NVIDIA, and they want you to do something for NVIDIA, and you come in, you have an interview, and what's NVIDIA do? It doesn't matter. Do you know anything about coding? No. You know anything about computers? No. That's all right. Welcome to NVIDIA." That is the most senseless thing I've ever heard in my life. We're bringing people into a company who don't understand the first thing of what that company does. That sounds like American government. We invite people, we give them a right to vote, we beg them to vote, and then we don't teach them how government works. That's insane. That's insane. And I'm sorry, that ain't a problem that was caused by Democrats. That isn't the problem that was caused by Republicans. It was a problem caused by laziness among us. We started thinking that all you had to do was learn math, and you learn a little bit of technology and you'll be able to just do everything. No, you can't. You don't know how the government works. How does a bill become a law? How do people get elected? What is gerrymandering? All that stuff matters, and we don't teach our children. And then, oh, what a surprise. They become voters, and they vote based on identity politics. That really isn't very surprising. We understand what identity is. Oh, that's a Democrat, that's a Republican, that's a conservative, that's a liberal. Yeah, we can identify those people who claim to be Democrats or Republicans. But we don't actually tell them how the government works, how politics works. And so what they end up doing is voting for, as if this was a beauty contest. Oh, I love the way he sounded. Think about one of the most famous scenes in our political history. The first televised debate between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. Now, look, I'm not a fan of Richard Nixon's, but I got to tell you, of the two of them, he was way more qualified than John Kennedy. Unfortunately for Tricky Dick, he didn't look so good on camera. He started sweating. And so he didn't really have good makeup. Whereas John Kennedy, boy, who wouldn't want to look like him and sound like him? He was just the made-for-TV president. And so here's this guy with virtually no experience running for president. And whether or not you think he would have been a better president than Nixon, that's a different question. But just from the perspective of somebody who has experience, he didn't even come close to Nixon. And yet, after that debate, what do we remember? Wow, Kennedy looks so good. Wouldn't you love to look at him on the State of the Union address? I'm so proud. And he has such an erudite Boston, snooty kind of sound. We're smart and good looking as Americans. That's why we had Kennedy. Now, maybe it was a good decision. I don't know. What I can tell you is it was not based on the right reasons. It just wasn't. We were voting for identity politics. A good-looking guy who is a Democrat, who says the right things, and that's it. That's nuts. That doesn't work. And then we look at the fact that we've got an economy that is based on capitalism. I'm a very staunchly favor. I love capitalism. The history of our planet, we have never fed more people. We have never clothed and housed more people than we clothe, house, feed during capitalist times. That doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of inequality. That doesn't mean that there isn't a lot that we can improve upon. But as far as which type of economic base it has been the most helpful for our entire planet? Oh, well, capitalism by far. Now, I had an uncle, and he and his wife, brilliant. When I say brilliant, it's like, oh, they're the smart people. Yeah, really smart people. And both of them were guidance counselors. That's what they did for a living. They were guidance counselors. which is not really a highly lucrative job. But he was really smart and he understood how finance worked. He spoke with my dad, who was a finance guy, and he basically started to just invest his money, what little he earned. And when he died at, like, I don't know, was he 94 years old? And my aunt was also roughly the same age. Their two children inherited about $14 million. Yeah, yeah, 14 million. He didn't win the lottery. He didn't make crazy invest. What he did was he understood how the market worked. And as a result of having a stable job that gave him a regular, if not particularly large income, he and his wife were able to amass what many of us would consider to be a fortune. $14 million. Oh my God. And it was all because he understood how compound interest works, how investments work. That's all. And I understand that it's nice to have experts make these decisions for you, but the market is not that complicated that you can't get involved early and just a little bit of time, a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. And then a few years later, a couple of decades, when you're getting closer and you're starting to gray and bald and I don't think I have a punch. I look okay. But anyway, so by the time you get all these signs of aging, you got money. You can retire. You're okay. You want to travel? Travel. You got a hospital expense that isn't fully covered? Don't worry, you're covered. But we don't teach our children how economics work. We don't tell them, look, this is what compound interest is. Get involved early, open up an IRA. If you're smart, open up a Roth IRA, and you could make a ton of money by the time you're ready to retire. And by the way, first of all, you don't have to retire at the age of 59 and a half when that Roth IRA is now all yours with no tax consequences. That's right. You don't have to, that's not even that old. But even if it seems far away, you understand you don't have to put that much money in all the time. Just a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time, and let it grow. And somebody can teach you how to get it to grow. Invest in the S&P 500, invest in the NASDAQ, invest in the Dow Jones. There are so many different ways to invest, and they're not complicated. And we don't teach our children. So they grow up not knowing how government works, not understanding how money works, and then we tell them, welcome to the capitalist center of the universe, the United States of America. And yes, you got to choose the government and it's capitalist, but you don't know anything about government or money. Ooh, you think that was a mistake? That's just but stupid. So when I look at K-12, and I hear about, well, we're falling behind in mathematics. We're falling behind in technology. No, we're falling behind in common sense. And by the way, the conservative response to that is, we're throwing a lot of money at education all over the country, and we're still failing. There must be an enormous amount of waste. Well, they may be right. There might be a lot of waste. Anything that is that large, I mean, the education system is huge. Even though it's broken up into small pieces, yeah, there probably is some waste. There probably is some fraud, sure. But is that the reason our children aren't getting the full benefit of the budgets? That's just a silly, nonsensical way of looking at it. They're not getting the benefit of it because we're not really focusing on what their real needs are. We're forgetting that they're eventually going to become voting citizens who invest in the stock market. It's kind of like the way we treat criminals. Do you know what? The one thing that almost every criminal who goes to prison, almost every single criminal has this in common with almost all the other criminals who are in prison. You know what that is? Almost all of them are going to get out one day. Yeah. They're almost all going to be released. Very, very few actually spend their entire lives in jail because of some sort of heinous crime. And yet we don't really care about training them to be ready to come out and be contributing as good members of society. because we don't want to throw good money after bad people. Well, we shouldn't be looking at it that way. We should be looking at everybody as somebody who can be a contributor to our economy. In other words, every child, every prisoner, every student, every adult, every doctor, every lawyer, everyone is a potential investor in our government and our economy. And if we see everybody as part of these two teams, the economy team and the political team, if we see them as members of our teams, we will get better. There will be less fraud. There will be more efficiency. There will be the result of education will be better citizens who understand how the economy works. One of my pet peeves are professional athletes. I'm a big sports fan, and I don't ever begrudge an athlete the opportunity to make millions of dollars because they are special, special talents. They really are. And they've dedicated their lives, their blood, sweat, and tears. They have dedicated their lives to being great at at their craft. And then they say, I think I'd rather sign with a team that is located in a state that has low or no income tax because I don't want to pay tax. Are you kidding me? You don't want to what? You don't want to pay tax? How are you going to get roads? Who do you think pays for the police that protect you when you go out in the street and everybody wants your autograph? Who do you think protects us when there's a threat of an invasion or a terrorist? Who do you think pays for the garbage to be picked up so that we're not, walking within our own filth? Taxes pay for almost every fundamental thing that we need, including, by the way, sports in schools. Taxes pay for that. And then you become a multi-zillionaire because you're so gifted and you don't want to pay taxes? Why? Why not? You're making $5, $10, $20 million and some even more. And you don't want to support the nation's economy that enabled you to become so wealthy and popular and happy, hopefully? You're on more than just your sports team. You're on the Team America here, and not just for the Olympics. You're on Team America. You want this country to do well. I know that almost everybody listening to me wants this country to do well. And you don't want to pony up a little bit of money in order to make that possible? So many of these athletes came from modest or poor backgrounds, possibly dependent on food, supplements for their food and their housing. And now you don't want to do the same favor for somebody else now that you're wealthy? You're reaping the benefits, the rewards of a society that's helped support you. And you, now that you have the opportunity to take care of yourself, you're just abdicating your responsibility with respect to everybody else? That's crazy. That's selfish, and it's self-destructive. And quite frankly, if you had been taught in school about how taxes work, you might actually be very proud to pay taxes. My father, when I remember one day I had a year where I had my own business and suddenly I had to pay, a good amount of quarterlies or end of the year, whatever it was. And I was like, all the blood drained from my face when my dad told me what, because he did my taxes. And when he told me what I was going to have to pay, and I was like, Dad, that is just so much money. And he looked at me and he said, and this is from a man who grew up in the Depression, okay? So he understood what it meant to be without. His family was dirt poor. And what he said was, Ian, I know it's hard to pay this right now, but this is a good sign. It means you're making more money. If you have to pay more money, it means you're making more money. And if you're making more money, that's good for you. And if you're paying more money, that's good for everyone. Now, I know that there is waste, and I know that there's fraud, and I know there's abuse. I know that. But it isn't to the tune of what Donald Trump is saying. It just isn't. It was a good marketing ploy to get elected. Do I want to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse? Yeah. Do I think it's going to breathe life into the economy? No. They figured that out when Doge came up with nothing. The only thing they came up with was all of the information about the people they were looking into. They didn't save us any money. They had to lie about it, and then they removed it from the official websites. If we teach our children how the economy works, if we teach our children how government works, and by the way, we have to teach our teachers that too, because they're many of them are just as ill prepared as the students they're teaching. And that, I don't blame them for that either. I blame us as a culture. We need to truly think in terms of long-term benefits. Because if we only think in terms of short-term benefits, I don't know, we have things like climate change, right? We have issues where China is way ahead of us on modern technology, on green technology, because they're looking for the future, not us. We don't want to make windmills. We'd rather have, we don't want to educate people so that they are able to do more jobs than just digging in a coal mine, which is what a terribly destructive to the human body coal mining is. But what options have we given them? And then we ask them to vote, and we're surprised that it's identity politics on both sides. It's insane. It's insane. So, next time you see a teacher, I don't care if they're, K-12, or in my world, I teach college. Next time you see a teacher, why don't you thank them for their service too? Because I'm telling you, I get paid less than the garbage man. I do. The garbage man gets paid more than I do. Police officers get paid more than I do. I don't begrudge them anything. I'm not in competition with them. I want to get paid more, not them paid less. I just want to get paid more. I want to get paid what I deserve. I provide a really important service with very little benefit financially to me. I do it because I truly love my students. I love my country. I love teaching. I love talking. You see, I never shut up. We've got to start focusing on long-term benefits. We have to. Because we can talk all we want about the decline in math skills and in science skills. But at the end of the day, it's about making what we learn relevant to our lives. And then people will learn. Teach somebody something that's meaningful to them. Show them, connect the dots between what they're learning and what they want to accomplish. And they will be very interested. And by the way, don't keep them from playing gym. Don't keep them from recess. Kids need to run around, for God's sake. That's part of education too. Strong body, strong mind. The mind is part of the body. If you want children to truly learn, teach them that their bodies are just as important as their brains. Give them an opportunity to run around and be children. And also teach them how math helps them understand that compound interest can make a guidance counselor a multimillionaire. Wow. That's worth knowing, don't you think? Well, you've been listening to What If I'm Right with Ian Heller. I'm hoping I gave you something to think about. You can disagree with me. I'm good with that. You can agree with me. I'm better with that. But what if I'm right? This is Ian Heller, and you're listening to What If I'm Right? Today, my guest is a very close friend and colleague and member of my cohort when I was in the graduate center studying sociology. Edwin is somebody who I still remember walking to the subway with and having very loud arguments with. And I think it's one of the best things about my friends is that if you can argue and then go out to drink, go out for a drink, that to me is like the perfect friendship. So, Edwin, I know you have always been an expert or have worked on criminology, specifically with misdemeanors. You actually have an article that came out about ICE and how they recognize misdemeanors or how they identify, I guess, targets for their investigation and arrests. So that's certainly a current piece. So Edwin, welcome to What If I'm Right? Let's find out if one of us or both of us can possibly be right simultaneously.
Thank you, Ian, for inviting me here. And I don't think it's hard to know whether all our conversations, I think either one of us was right. But I really enjoyed, I think, arguing with you, but really just talking
Yeah.
about issues. And I learned a lot from them. And I think I learned a lot today. And I'm happy to, talk about anything and everything that you want to talk about here. I know we'll talk about crime, policing, big other issues, I think, of today. And that's what I think, just enjoy in general as being a
That's
professor.
great. So, Edwin, as I neglected to mention just now, is a professor over at Baruch College. I am actually a professor over at City College and at John Jay, and it pays because they pay so well. So I'm all over the place. But Edwin teaches sociology at Baruch and at Columbia and other institutions. Lucky enough to have him. So, Edwin, you have spent quite a bit of your academic background and focus on misdemeanors. Now, a lot of people overlook the value of understanding misdemeanors. Why do you study misdemeanors? Wouldn't we be better off just focusing on the really big stuff, like murder and robbery and all the big felony crimes? Why misdemeanors?
Well, that I could probably go on for hours, I think, just on that question alone. But I think it's a central question for cities, urban areas like New York City, Chicago, LA. We hear all about that in the news, right? And now we have, National Guards and other aspects, I think, trying to come in to tame, so-called crime. But one of the reasons why I've always studied misdemeanors, and I worked actually at on the Data Collaborative for Justice, which was the Misdemeanor Justice Project before John Jay, while I was doing my PhD, because when I growing up in New York, all you heard about was violent crime, was murders, and then in New York City, they developed a strategy like broken windows policing. We hear about zero tolerance policing. We hear about stop and frisk later. And those are all aspects of more controlling misdemeanors, right? And the real difference between it is that if we've made up, especially in terms of policing practices, policies that are really trying to tame violent crime, and most of the taming of violent crime has been to ramp up misdemeanor policing, arresting people for everything. And this is all in the kind of vein that if we really control, minor crimes and basically in disorder and everything little, which is what the broken
Right.
windows policing was, right? Criminals basically won't be going rampant. We won't see the violent crime at all. There's a lot of evidence that none of that really is related to violent crime at all, but you won't hear anything about that, right? And so because of that, over at least in New York City, misdemeanors is way more. There are way more arrests for misdemeanors. There's way more summonses, way more police activity looking for minor crimes than there are for violent crime. And also, one of the problems with violent crime is really police can't really stop it, any action, right? We don't want to hear that a lot. We want to believe the police can't stop anything, right? And putting them there. But policing in general is really more about a social control, putting them out there in the streets, and that maybe it'll work, right? Having more police in the streets as a social control measure. And one of the aspects is just really arresting a lot of people for misdemeanors. So if you ever go down to most criminal courts around the country, you're going to see almost all of the cases are really low level offenses in comparison to violent offenses. You will see some assault and some violent, aspects, or robberies, or people with weapons. Yes, that happens, right? This doesn't say that violent crime does not happen everywhere. It definitely happens. But by vast and large, policing is misdemeanor policing basically in the country. And there's just a big background to try to do that, because that's really what we can
So
do in terms of policing and trying to act like we can solve
so
crime.
just to try and kind of put a little bit focus on this. Misdemeanors are the overwhelming majority of crime committed in this country and probably throughout the world. Misdemeanors are defined as any crime that is punishable by 1 year or less in jail, but rather than prison for the most part, because prison is usually for housing felons who are serving over a year for their crime. So misdemeanors, using the broken windows, which is something that everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people are familiar with. Broken windows theory basically says if we can get people to stop doing the quality of life type crimes, whether it's the squeegee guys, which is what they were doing in the 80s and the 90s, or vagrancy and where people are following and being aggressive panhandling. That was another one. And if we can get people to just pay attention to the little stuff, the big stuff will end up falling by the wayside, because people commit crimes, serious crimes, when they're in an environment where they think that there is an acceptance of bad behavior, let's just say. And is that true? I mean, that's probably the most famous of all of the theories on how crime works. And there's not a lot of people in the world of sociology who say, yeah, that works. Does it work?
You won't find many. And one of the problems we have just in thinking about misdemeanors, right, is that there's no real definition of a misdemeanor per se, because it's socially constructed in the political choice in what is codified into the law. And so every state has a different set of misdemeanors too, as well, right? We can even take things like cannabis or marijuana possession, that it was codified in the law before some of the states legalized, but in some states it's not legal. Some states it is legal, right? Some states put certain amounts of possession are actually felonies, and very small amounts can be a felony. You can go to states in the South, mostly Georgia, Alabama, and Texas. And so the thing that when we think about in that kind of realm, when we talk about crime rate, we're talking about how governments choose to define, count, respond to certain behaviors, and what is defined as a low-level minor offense, whether it's just a little, making noise outside the streets, being out in the park too late, urinating, smoking cannabis, or if it's more serious types of crime, right? We have small level crimes could be felonies and vice versa. We have to understand that this is really what society has made it to be, and not that where we have really any kind of definition of what people are really doing and what is a low level offense versus a more
So
serious type of offense. And we all can say murder is a
right.
serious offense, right? But then after we get through murder, we get through maybe robbery with a gun. We get to, and those are really not much of the offenses most people make and do right in life. And then in general, most of us commit some type of offense, that's codified into the law. Most of us don't even know what is the litany of it, whether it's jaywalking, right? That's still illegal actually in most places around the country, even if it's the police aren't arresting anyone
Right. So
for it.
I hear what you're saying, and basically it falls into the category of social disorganization, notwithstanding the fact that the idea of social disorganization is a bit of a kind of a charged thing anyway, but a term anyway. But social disorganization basically, and I want to just kind of really make it very clear. Social disorganization says that people living in an environment where the norms are not being followed, that in a way that are consistent with the largest of social norms, that they're more likely to break laws. But is that actually true? If you see a lot of, do we see crime go up or down based on whether or not windows are broken or fixed. Uh, Garbage is on the streets or in the trash can. People are homeless and hoping for money versus following you for money. Like these are all things that they claim have an impact on more serious crime. And what I'm trying to understand is, does it really actually have? Is there any demonstrable proof, data that says, yeah, if we reduce these quality of life types of misbehavior, and some of it isn't crime, some of it is just the place has a lot of graffiti. So they're saying, well, social disorganization, people are more likely to commit crime. But are they? Does it go up and down? Crime, and we're talking about more serious crime. Does more serious crime actually get impacted by whether or not the windows are fixed and the people are following traditional norms?
But all I can say is from the academic standpoint, we've had maybe 20, 30-year history of studying this. And even, I think the answer short is most likely not at all. And we have very few studies that have actually proven it. Most of the most rigorous methodological tests actually disprove it and say misdemeanor arrest, policing for minor offenses and disorder, social and physical disorder, does not actually have anything to do with violent crime. And that's, I think, one of the big takeaways from just looking at the research from it. I think it's pretty consistent on it. Um, but one of the things I think we have to really think about, I think when we're thinking about this, and you talked about is crime up, crime down. I always think about, and I talk about this in my classes where I talk about criminology or policing, right? And I ask my students, was crime up or down last year in New York City compared to the year before? And I get a lot of students
That's
who
right.
don't really know, right? But many, and if you ask the New Yorker that's on the street, is crime up now? Right? We never actually hear when crime is down. Is crime down now? The media does not cover it. Actually, it's down most months, right? It can go down from the last month. Oh, crime's down now. It's great on the subway in New York City. It's great. Right? No
No.
one ever mentions that. They just say, right? And it's also anecdotal evidence of something that happens, right? And the video gets circulated. A lot of my students say it's unsafe on the subway in New York City. Now, do we compare that to when I was growing up in New York City
Yeah.
in the 80s and 90s? You couldn't drive the subway
There were
without seeing
2,000
actual crime.
murders. There were
And it,
2,000 murders a
right,
year. It's 10% of that,
right.
between 10
Not the
and
same city.
15% of that now. And I was living
Right.
here as you were when the murder rate was crazy high. And I was okay. I just
Mhm.
stayed away from certain areas that, ultimately became a little more safe over time, and actually much more safe over time. But the fact is, there were still 8 million people living, and we were still getting, for the
Mhm.
most part, I don't want to go back to that. I don't want to go back to that. But it's like
Right.
the
I
perception. I
don't
had a
either.
student, it was very funny. I had a student, an older student, who basically got all of her data from Fox News and OANN. And it's like, look, I understand what you're thinking. You're thinking that it is safer. She just kept on talking about wanting to move to Florida. I want to move to Florida. It's much safer. And I said, have you done like any data analysis to determine your confidence that it's actually safer in Florida? I said, if you actually did the research, you would find that New York City is safer than any major city, or even, quite frankly, smaller cities in throughout Florida. That suburban versus suburban, safer in New York. Rural versus rural, safer in New York. But she absolutely
Similarly.
would not be convinced, even for a moment, that she was going to be moved, because she apparently wanted to move to Florida. It was like, you know what? Good luck to you. You want to go there. You want to feel safe.
Mhm.
And that's really important, is the perception of
Mhm.
safety. And that's something I would love. I know you've done some research on the value and the
Mhm.
use of the perception of safety versus actual safety. What have you found out about perception versus reality?
Well, it's actually all perception and fear, basically. And actually, the interesting thing is And we hear this actually from politicians now. They recognize it too. And so if they want to put National Guards or police in subways, they recognize it's not going to actually do anything in lowering crime in subways, but it'll make people feel safer, right? And that's actually what the whole broken windows theory and the people who invented in the 90s actually knew about it. They actually did tests too and knew that their theory didn't work in terms of reducing crime in the subway, on the streets. It came from, James Q. Wilson and George Kelling, who were the main architects of it, who were big criminologists in the 60s and 70s, and they had a 20-year history of studying policing. And they, even before they invented the broken windows theory and misdemeanor type policing, already knew that it was people's fears that was part of this nexus, right? And they wanted that when you talked about the social disorganization theory, to bring back more community controls, right? In these communities was to make people feel more safe, right? And it was that fear and going inside and not, taking control of your neighborhood. The only problem is fear is generally irrational, right? And has nothing to do with data or kind of where I'm in the line as a researcher, real evidence-based theories that actually works, right? And we have people even going to these communities to try to bring that out. And so if we're not connected to it and we're trying to even study it, we have to understand that too as well. But one of the problems of fear is that, you know, and that there's a political nature to it too. Safety matters, but we don't really understand safety. And real safety is trust, stability, connection, right? To people's communities. And then actually that is racialized, right? And classed where, if you are not interacting with crime, which is I think one of the story you're talking about in Florida, especially, and this goes for maybe say middle class white people who have no connection, right? And don't live in high crime neighborhoods. But if it's such a political issue and you can watch videos of it and think it and you have voice, because all politics, right, is basically everyone has a say, even if they're not impacted by something, right? And we talk about Fox News and maybe political wedges that use most of these anecdotal incidents to rage it up, right? And that leads to policy. We have National Guards in cities. DC crime went down, right? Actually, there's no precedent that we needed, National Guards or other people to take over the city. There are plenty of stats that actually show that over time. Crime went down in New York City from 2024, right? Actually, from the previous year.
Oh, it's
Actually, crime is,
dramatically
in
dropped.
terms of most
Yeah,
crime
and one of the
offenses.
things that people
Yeah,
did not, it was very interesting when COVID hit and everybody just kind of went indoors and became uh,
and crime went up from that.
dramatically.
Let me just say
And as
this,
soon
Ian,
as it
right?
happened,
And it
yeah,
should go up though,
of
but it has
course.
to go up, right? So that's the thing. It must go up because
Right,
people, and this is where I say, right, we have to do the comparison. Crime's going to go down in 2000, so it goes up, and everyone said
right.
crime is going rampant. Well, it's going to tip up a little bit, right? Because it went ridiculously down because we were all inside. There's not a chance to even do it,
But that was in the
right?
beginning. Over
And so,
time, COVID ended up you saw a spike in crime because there were too many people with too much time
right.
on their hands. The more you are out,
Right, and certain crimes too. We should think about
that's right.
domestic violence can go up. There's really categorized, right?
That's
Like what
right. So
happens.
what you have is certain categories of crimes go up. 85% of all murders are committed by people where the person murdered knew the person who murdered them. 85%. That means it's a personal crime. If you're around people, domestic violence, same thing. You're talking about 100% of the people who are hurt by domestic violence. They know the perpetrator. It's their husband, it's their wife, it's their boyfriend, their girlfriend, whomever. So you know that when they are with each other a lot, it's going to increase the amount of that sort of violent crime. So as soon as COVID hit and we all kind of retreated and we had too much time on our hands, anybody who studied this stuff said, "Oh, crime's going to spike. There's no way of avoiding it." It's kind of like what's going to happen in this, Edwin, off the top of your head, crime going to go up this summer compared with the winter, or is it going to go down?
Yeah, I mean, when the winter
That's right.
happens, it goes
Winter
down.
happens, winter happens, crime goes down. Summer happens,
Yeah.
crime goes up, and that's of course in more northern climate communities in particular, because people are out all the time in Los Angeles. But in New York, you're talking about fewer people on the streets, fewer during winter, and a lot of people kind of interacting with each other, and crime increases when we interact with each other because it does. Opportunities become more apparent to to the potential criminal. You can see opportunities when you're outside versus when you're holed up inside with a mask. And so the idea that there's going to be a spike during COVID, of course there was a spike during COVID. And what happened as soon as COVID became, was in the rearview mirror? There was a dramatic reduction. And so it was just so frustrating. It's not to say that we shouldn't do whatever we can to minimize crime. But the idea that it goes that it is somehow tethered to what whether there are homeless people, it's like, nah, it's really not where the problem is. It's not broken windows. It's a lack of there's a sense of, I don't feel safe here. And if you don't feel safe, it doesn't matter if
Hmm.
there's not a single crime being committed. You don't feel safe. And that's what politicians have truly embraced. And it's really been since the Omnibus Crime Control Act of 1984, which kind of got all of the Democrats who had been very progressive to say, no, 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 the only way to get reelected is if we get tough on crime, which is understandable. Crime increased dramatically in the 70s and 80s and 90s throughout the country, in the 60s too, for that matter. So it wasn't surprising
Hmm.
that people
Hmm.
were feeling unsafe. It had become less safe. But now the people who were focused on dealing with crime from a more social perspective as opposed to a punitive perspective were now on board in the punitive side. And what happened to crime? It spiked even more. So why did crime spike even more when we became more punitive towards criminals?
Hmm. And that's always the problem too, actually. I just show this in class, um, where like with crime, we become more punitive, and crime is still rising up, right? People forget about that, right? They'll say, "Oh, let's just put more," right? We haven't done it enough, right? We need to be more punitive, more prisons, more police, right? But instead of seeing that, it doesn't have much to do with it, right? There's a lot of evidence, like this place like the Brennan Center has done a lot of kind of reports and studies, tracing incarceration and the crime nexus, the reasons for violence, right? In general, a lot of other researchers in criminology who study it. And there's just so many other factors that really have nothing to do with policing, really, right? And if we put, it's this thing we talk about all the time that, that we don't really fund, right? Mental health, education, right? All, social safety nets being the key, I think, to really solving all these issues. But the lack of funding there, let's go to institutions, right? That probably have a less bang for the buck. And actually, they have, especially when you think about communities of color, Black and Brown communities, it's really troublesome because those are disinvested communities already in it. And right, and where we can probably solve those you need also communities that, in those time periods you're talking about, Ian, had some of the highest, violence. Policing did not really help it much at all. And then policing doesn't help victims too, there too, which is what studies show, right? So you're not helping the victims, but you're also not helping to solve crime by putting more police. But what he does do is that we didn't make up, crime itself, and then misdemeanors and surveillance and cameras, and which also leads to evictions and just much more social control measures for those communities. Um, if we really thought differently about it and thought about a restructuring, and gets to other more controversial issues that people talked about, whether it's Black Lives Matter and defund the police, but really what they were calling for, if we get away from the
The language
language
was
and the
just
names,
so
right
but
here,
stupid. It was the dumbest damn thing to say. You
right,
don't want any police? Are you kidding
yeah,
me?
I see,
That's just
and
crazy.
well, I don't think they see, and I don't think that. And here's our first argument here of today. I don't think they said we don't want any police. Defund the police. Now we could talk about whether that's like take all the budgets away, right? They were
But
just
they
saying
weren't
move this
saying it
money
right.
to
And
things that
how
work,
we say
right?
things is
They weren't.
absolutely essential because people hear the sound bites. And the sound bite was, we don't
But
want
the thing
police.
here,
And that's insane. And it isn't what most of them
yeah,
wanted. Although there are some who
They,
believed, and it's
yeah.
a small group,
Yeah,
very
there's some,
small
but
group,
most.
but a small group that says, yeah, let's just get rid of policing. It's like, well, you know what? You go to the island, to some island without police, bless your heart, I'm not visiting. I'm not visiting. If there are no police,
Yeah.
I'm not interested in going there because I don't trust that we're all going to be, behaving well. I just don't.
Right. Yeah, but I'll turn this on, and I teach this in my intro public affairs class, right, at Baruch, and tell my students to really think about, because this is the public affairs aspect of it. Why won't we take up some of their arguments that are
You're
actually right,
right.
right? Why do we
You're
focus on
right.
the name? Why do we focus on, right, on these? But that's part of this
That's right.
public, right, institution where if you don't have the right name, we're not going to even
That's
think
right.
about the arguments really, and we shouldn't even think about most of those arguments that they portray. Disinvestment in communities, putting more money in there, and then what did we do? Actually, off that, we put more
Right.
police, right, in those communities. The police budgets have gone up. I mean, we're talking doubling of police budgets since in the
Now,
last
maybe
five
that
years,
may not be
right?
such a bad
In a lot of
thing
cases,
if we also include in police people who can deal with mental health issues. To ask the police
right?
officer to be both a law enforcer and a therapist is that's just not fair. It's not fair to the
Exactly.
police. It just
And
is, and it's foolish.
yeah, and that was their argument. A lot of those are great arguments, though, right? In there, that we haven't even taken up the seriousness, I think, of the weight of what they were talking about, right? And that's all I'll say here. I think people get knocked on names and or what they said, but I think their argument and their evidence was actually right on, and we should focus more on that. Instead, what would we do? We didn't focus even on any of the arguments that are correct, and we went and put more police. What we know
Right.
does not work, right? We have no evidence to base on any of it, right? If we look at an evidence-based approach, we don't
But
really
here's the
focus on that
problem,
here in the
Edwin.
U.S. much. I teach this in my classes. It's not evidence-based. It's mostly reactionary. I think approaches. It's not based on evidence. And we like the fear tactics. The media pulls us to a lot in these issues. And then what we get is things that don't work. And those, I think, are really bad, especially for Black and brown communities, right? And the most poorest communities in the country. And I'll say even some poor white
For
communities
every
also as
community,
well,
it's bad for
also
every
get the bank of
community.
the buck, gets
Yeah,
the bang of the
but
buck for
but
these.
but
Right, and it's bad for everybody because the thing is,
of
even
course it
for rich
is.
people, if you have the fear of it, if you have the fear of right, the fear of it, but it's not solving your problem, and you feel safer just because you see a police officer, but it's not doing anything for you, it's not a good thing for you, and it's not a good
And
thing
I'm
for
going to add to
society,
that.
really.
Okay. We can talk about fear when you are a wealthy person. You can live in a gated community or in a very large mansion, and you can get in and out of your helicopter, your limousine, whatever, and you don't actually have to confront fear on a personal basis at all. So that isn't going to be a good argument, as far as I'm concerned. Trying to tell people, hey, we want you to focus on this. No, they don't have a reason to. They can avoid it. But there is an argument, and that is a capitalist argument. The more people who are contributing to our to our economic base, the more people who are employed, who are purchasing items, the more money actually will filter up to wealthy people as well. So that if you have people in prison, those companies are not making any, they're getting almost no value out of people who are in prison. NVIDIA is not making any money when people are in Sing Sing. They're just not making money from that. On the other hand, if these people are actually gainfully employed, they might actually be using ChatGPT and Claude AI. And so the economic value of having people not in prison but actually educated and working towards some being contributing members of society brings all people more money. And I'm a big fan of capitalism, huge fan of capitalism. And it's not because I think capitalism is so terrific. It's that every other concept doesn't work, in my opinion, including socialism and communism. It's a great theory. Libertarianism, they're all nuts. The libertarians are nuts. The socialism people are nuts. Capitalism works, but we need to constantly be aware of how it feeds on itself negatively or positively. You arrest people, you take them out of the members of a contributing class, and they don't actually drive the economy in any way, shape, or form positively. You give them a job, they actually increase everybody's wealth. That's just straight. What's his name? Adams, the founder of capital. The godfather of capitalism. Oh, I can't. Adam
Adam
Smith,
Smith.
yeah. That's basically straight Adam Smith capitalism. More people work, and we both studied this with Max Weber's concept of the Protestant work ethic, which created such an incredible kind of a virtuous cycle where people were working, reinvesting. They would reinvest that money, get more people working for them. More people working for them meant more people buying their products. More people buying their products meant that the company made more money. The company made more money. They would reinvest in the company. It was just a wonderful cycle until greed became the watchword. Once greed becomes the watchword, everybody who doesn't have money is an irrelevance to you. And that's where there's a problem. But I want to get back to your focus on misdemeanors. You had mentioned earlier about how perhaps social safety nets might be useful in reducing crime. We all know that there's no such thing as eliminating crime. If you eliminate crime, then something's wrong in society. There's too many controls, or we're in anarchy. But we need to have crime at a reasonably low amount. How does social safety nets actually improve people's lives so that criminogenic behavior diminishes? How do we get crime down?
Yeah, and I think most crime really doesn't emerge out of like the bad character kind of behaviors, but it emerges out of instability, unemployment, homelessness, untreated trauma, lack of opportunity. And the social safety nets are like really, unemployment benefits, housing assistance, healthcare, education can reduce the pressures that lead people into these kind of survival crimes or high risk situations, right? When people's basic needs are met, the incentives and desperation drive much of everyday crime. It lessens or kind of weakens, I think, a lot and
Social
dramatically.
institutions.
And so
But
that's
how
what
about
they're talking
institutions
about.
also? The
Right,
church. Like you can be, I'm an agnostic,
right.
okay? I hope there's a God because maybe I'll live forever. I don't know. But to my mind, the church, your mosque, your synagogue, all of these places create a sense of attachment to normative values that we all agree on. And when we see a diminution, a reduction in social attachments to institutions like the church, there's going to be a problem, right? I mean, is that part of the increase in crime is a lack of faith? Coming from an agnostic, I think it's pretty funny to say that, but is a lack of faith one of the institutions that is responsible for the increase in crime?
Yeah, well, I think that's also in general, and then, the lack of community and people having, I think, right, the connection to others, because that's what the
Right.
church does, right? And faith and having others, I think, who are going to be kind of that a nice background when times get tough, or you can like, have the spiritual nature of it that helps you out of the dark times, which everyone has, right? But some people have it way more than others when they're down and out. And so that's why, it's interesting because society and government are supposed to kind of give us that kind of lens of, but we do need the, kind of the social and the kind of, community groups, organizations, associations also have to be in place, right? To provide that, that sense of community, right? And communities that have those things and strong natures generally do better than others. And so we have to think about, okay, how can government fill in the gaps, right, that are happening in those places where it isn't? And the problem you have too is that it's like a chicken and egg kind of situation, right? You don't know what's leading to the other. And so once communities have been disinvested and and you can think about the rising prices, right? And housing prices. I know a lot of churches, right, who can't make ends meet, right? And so part of it is, over time, the rising cost of everything. And you talk about capitalism, but that's also can help, helps rich people or people who have the means and the education and the networks, I think, to survive, and others who don't have it, it leaves them, dry out. You talked about greed too as well in there. And so it's hard to really measure any of these things. But what we do know, inequality has, gone up a whole bit, I think, in, places like the US, and communities over the last, 20, 30 years. And the unequalness of it, even COVID has dramatically
Yep.
also raised that too. We see inflation now and all high prices everywhere. You get a sandwich and it'll be $15, right? When it was, pre-COVID, you might have had, $7 sandwich. And so those costs and the rise in income levels have not risen up, especially for people who are at the bottom
I think
of
we have
the
to add
rung.
to that. Yeah.
And so that
Yeah.
makes it
I
really
think we
tough.
also need to add to
Yeah.
that, which is because most people who are, poor don't commit crime. Okay. That's just a fact. The
Right.
overwhelming majority of poor
Completely.
people don't
Completely.
commit crimes. Okay. But it does
Right.
lead
Right.
to some increase. The real issue that a lot of these institutions provide or kind of make up for is if you feel crime is often a sense of not being attached to the community. Okay, either because the community's not treating you well or because you just have no hope. And so crime will often be a function of, look, I would care about taking your money, but I really don't care about you at all because you don't care about me. I don't care about hurting you because you don't care about hurting me. It's all this rationalization. I don't mean that it's only that, but there's a rationalization that many criminals go through that dehumanizes or lowers the value of whoever they are harming. They deserve it.
Mhm.
They are bad. They don't care about me. All that stuff is real. That's social contacts. And rather than just simply saying, let's pour money into communities that are, I shouldn't say it that way. Rather than looking at it as pouring money into crime or criminal behavior to reduce it, that's actually not the theory that works. What works is pouring money. I shouldn't even say pouring money, enabling people to have options so that they can grow, so that there is something that makes them feel like if they do what people expect of them and want of them, that they are going to have a better outcome, that their lives will improve. If you don't feel like your life is going to improve by getting an education, by going to your church or synagogue or mosque, by getting by joining the army. I mean, there are all sorts of institutions that support normative behavior and values. But if we don't actually support
Mhm.
those institutions, people feel less connected to their world, their environment, and the likelihood of crime increases because the thing that keeps somebody from committing a crime is often feeling attached to either the person or the type of person that you're harming. If you don't care about that person, who cares? Why would you care about committing a crime?
Mhm. Yeah, I think one of the things here, and this is why I would say here, shifting from control to care, like
Mm,
this is really actually about caring about people, and I think we need that mentality, really more of it. Policing is short-term control, social policy is long-term prevention, and in the politics nature of it, long-term prevention never excels, right? We have people who I think who come in power and they're not going to talk
that's
about
right.
the programs that are going to right work maybe 10, 15, 20 years when they're not there. They want to show results, right? You can show the results by I look at crime going, and this is why I think it's more of a political issue really than anything else. Is we can show some results of crime going down next month, people feeling safer. These are studies we can do, and everyone feeling better about it. But actually showing improvement, I think in society is more about investments, right? It's more about social, economic, investments in communities, in society at large, in every community possible. And a strong safety net, replaces the politics of fear. I would say potentially if we looked at a care model with politics of fairness too as well, because what happens is that it also becomes completely unfair when we're actually bringing these systems of institutional, you know, um, institutions that really have a whole history of domination, right? Of going into racialized class kind of basis of how they actually do their business too as well. Which, but and that's rights and fairness, and I think you, Ian, come up with a law degree, right? And lawyers, argue this, but I think a lot of the problem on the ground is those are we don't come from a human rights perspective, I think, in this country. And if we had a more kind of humanistic kind of approach to this, evidence-based, of course, too. Go with the evidence. If it's against our mindset, right? Of course, the politics and the fear and everything else always gets in the way. And we didn't even gotten into immigration control and enforcement and what happens there. But one of the problems is that we really need to go by much more evidence-based models, care about everybody, right? Not just second our way off, right? And care about our own power or where we come from, getting misled by the media, right? And focus more about how do we have a society that's really inclusive
So
for
I
everybody,
agree with you,
right?
but
I know
here's the
that's more
thing
the
that I think
ideals.
Democrats in particular, progressives, have completely just fallen short. When you hear a progressive person saying, "Oh, that's not what I mean when I said defund the police. I don't mean no police. I mean just to use some of the funding towards therapy." It's like, then you can't call it defunding the police. You can't. Because one of the things that
Yeah.
conservatives, Republicans are so much better at is getting the message across in a few catchy words. And Democrats,
Yeah. I think but I would say there though, just that they're there, though, it was more about they were able to turn into abolish the police,
yeah, but
right?
no, defund the police.
Defund the
The
police. I think
first
that's what
time I heard it, I said, "Are you out of your mind? You can't say that. What you can say is improve policing with therapy, with people who who are social workers as part of the police/peace force." That's what you do. You don't say we're going to cut it back. When crime is going up, the last thing anybody wants to hear is that we're going to cut back on police. And by the way, to your point, when the perception of crime is that it's high, even if it's not true, the last thing anybody wants to hear is that we're going to reduce the amount of money that goes to a police officer. They don't want to hear that. So if we give a message that can be misconstrued and then used by your adversary, well, then that's a stupid approach. That's a stupid. It made no sense.
Yeah.
And so if we don't learn, if one side refuses to learn what the successful approaches of the adversary, then you're just doomed to continue to lose and fail. The defund police makes no sense as a moniker, as a as a just a phrase. It's just a dumb phrase. So what we have to learn from that, because everything you're saying I agree with, that if we paid more attention to the issues that are causing crime rather than just simply being punitive about it once it happens, we have a fighting chance of reducing it. But if we're not going to use a term that people can get behind, it ain't going to happen. Then we're just going to have people playing on fear. I liked when you used the word care rather than crime. That this is about care. This is about caring for people. But when we're going to talk about caring for people, we have to make sure that there's an interest convergence, using a critical theory terminology here. We need to understand that people
Yeah.
have to feel that if we put money into something, there's going to be a benefit for them, because that money's coming from their pockets in small or large percentages. And so if you're going to say, let's put money into a community, into an institution, I'm all for it if it's going to bring something back to me. But that's to just simply say it's about helping others as opposed to helping others will help us. You're not going to win. I just want to help other people, because people have too many problems of their own.
Yeah.
They are not worried about your problem. They're worried when your problem bleeds into them. And that's all about marketing. That's all about how you sell the concept. You got to explain
Yeah. But just it. That is what it's all about. It's all
That's
about
right.
marketing. It's all about a concept. But see, this is tough for a researcher, right? Because it's not based on any evidence, right? There's not most of this is, and I talk public affairs and public policy now, right? And the sociologist, I mean, comes with the evidence base and says this, right? There's no evidence here for
Right.
more policing, right? There's no evidence for most of the policing we even have, right? No evidence that we added all these policing and didn't do much for violent crime. But then the other side of it in the public affairs is that it matters, right? Because if people don't feel safe, that's a
That's right.
political wedge, right? Or the names, and I teach this too in terms of reparations, right? And a lot of work I do is on reparations for Black communities, mainly because of the history, I think, of disinvestment, taken and other stuff from them. But in studying it out, and these policies have really hurt Black Americans. But the thing about it, though, is the name matters and how
That's
you're going
right.
to introduce like reparations. The name matters, and it has mattered historically. But that also is a sad part, I think I'm going to say here, because if we just come from an evidence base, look at the arguments that people are presenting, and most of the people who even defund the police movement, right, as a contrast to what you're talking about, came from the heart of representing people, you're right, marginalized in communities where policing really went overboard, right, where it didn't matter and empirically did not do too much. And then also the one part of it, it wasn't helping, just like you talked earlier, mental health or crises and things where there is a need for health, right? Authorities and people with expertise that the police cannot do, right? And those calls still, there's a lot of programs and people in many cities around the country instituting those and showing that it works, right? Where the call doesn't go to the police, it goes to
That's
a different
right.
number, right? And the mental person can go there to help. And that's what we could think about the rust of it, right? Of the argument here and thinking about what were they actually saying that's good, right? Let's not get on the words that people use on it. Whether we agree on it, because people agree with defund the police and some people don't agree. But let's not think about that. Let's think about the argument. Now the problem is for communities that are not in power, right? We look at how they introduce the term. We look at a lot of these things that don't come in with what the evidence they're bringing, I think, onto the table and legitimate arguments that make our
I
society
hear
better, I
you. I
think.
really do. I'm an academic, okay? But the problem with being an academic is exactly the word. Academic means, oh, you know something and it has no value. It has no use, no application, right? That's simply
And
academic,
that's why I say fear
right?
matters. And that's why I say we have to take fear in complete
That's right.
consideration, right? Because that's what's used of actuality, right? Whether it's like whether perception, right? People's perception of crime, it doesn't happen to them and they see something. Well, they're voters, right?
That's
They
right.
actually have play. If the media cares about them, it's going to play it up. It matters too in the political process, the policy process, what goes on in everyday life and what we see. Even in social media now, a lot of these things are distort our reality, right? Totally, but it matters,
That's
right?
right.
And so because of that distortion, it becomes perception, right? So it's the weird part as an academic too, is that we have to study that too and untangle, right, the complicated nature of how to get out of it. And so when you're thinking about social policies, it's intertwined with things that are
You're
real
right.
and
But
not
here,
real. It's intertwined with media, not. It's intertwined with people's fears, not fears. It's intertwined with things that we're not doing for people and things that we're doing for other people, right? And all of that is part of how do we think about what a good
you're
policy
right.
is.
And well, you and I agree on most everything, most of the time, quite frankly. But the ultimately, everything is a sales pitch. And so while I couldn't agree more that decisions, that policy needs to be based on scientific data, empirical data that says this works, this doesn't work, I couldn't agree more. But you're not going to sell that to the public. And so what we have is what do we want to, we need to start off not with fact-based approaches. We need to find common ground in what is our goal first. First and foremost, the common goal is reducing crime. I don't think there's any question. And that's something where you've seen the insane accusations coming from the right that the left wants increased crime. That's the silliest thing in the world. The left doesn't want more crime. Left, no
Right.
one
No one
wants
wants
more
more
crime,
crime.
but they've been able
Mm.
to take that message and sell it because of such poorly phrased marketing ploys like defund the police. That makes no sense to me. In other words, if you are able to say, look, we're on the same page as the conservatives, we want crime to go down. We just have a different idea of how to make crime go down. And we can call it evidence based all we like. The words the reason why a broken windows theory became so popular, quite frankly, is because it was a great name. Sorry, it really was. It was
Yeah.
a wonderful name. Oh yeah, we have more crime when we see a place that looks like people don't take pride in it, that they don't feel attached to it. Yeah, there were a lot of broken windows. Yeah, there's going to be crime. Okay, I mean, damn, that was such a great name.
But this is an article I've been working on for a while. This is the problem of it, right? They came up with a great name, a great pitch. It worked. They presented
That's
no
right. It
evidence
was
that
in
it
the
actually even worked
Atlantic.
in
It
their
wasn't. It
article
was in the
and their
Atlantic
pitch.
magazine.
Yes, and it was no. They actually shown that it probably
That's
didn't
right.
work. Actually, if you read the article, I give this to my students. We read the original article, read all the empirical evidence. They're not convinced it too, and I have work to do this and explain it out. But I know that the problem there is right. Well, they had a good pitch. It
That's
worked.
right.
We did all of this. We put billions of dollars right into more type of policing. Right, that doesn't really work. Right, the empirical evidence of scholarly. Right, but what you said is true. It doesn't matter as an academic whether we test this out
Listen,
20, 30 years. And the sad part, we have things that don't work. It sounds great. Let's put it into motion.
that's
Okay, there
right.
you go. Right. And that's also the thing in the fear of it. Right. That's actually been the last 30 years of it, that all of this has worked to ingrain that more fear. Right. And so it works to increase it in different populations that don't even see it. Right. And the media and crime, which is different from, I think, me growing up, I think in the 80s and 90s, but seeing it now, the discussion, in terms of, when crime's up, when crime's down, or places like New York City, which has one of the lowest crime rates,
That's
right?
right.
You can have right now in general, and talking about it, is divorced from
That's
all
right.
reality,
You're
really, right?
absolutely right.
And so that's the toughest thing as an academic. It's the toughest thing as an academic because I can study it and say we know, right, from this trial of it of the last 50 years of how it's going, and we still don't have any evidence on how this solved, right? To stop that because it's mostly politics, it's mostly fear, it's mostly irrational things, right? That are rational now because they're baked in to the way the problem has become, the policy making has become, and the political nature of it. Um, and so that's one of those tough things. We have a lot of these other issues too.
You're right, but
I
I
think
want to stay
in the
on
United
this.
States
I
kind of
want to stay on
context,
this,
right? That are
and
based
I
on that.
want, and I think that the perfect example of a person who is a genius at distilling things to a level that people really just immediately understand is Donald Trump. He perfected the tweet. He absolutely is the tweet president. And what we if we don't accept the reality that our politics are determined by sound bites, then we're just going to keep on talking past each other. Like you can talk all you like about having the better approach statistically, empirically. Oh, that's nice. You ain't selling this unless you got a good sound bite. And that's where I come from. That's where I come from. I mean, I'm a lawyer, I'm a sociologist, but for 25 years, I ran my own company where I had to deal with marketing and advertising because I managed a whole lot of very, very talented radio and television hosts and was selling their times. That's one of the things that I did for them. And everything is about making sure that you can give an elevator pitch, right? Isn't that what everything what do they say about a new movie? You want a new movie? If you can write the theme on a napkin at the meeting, you got a shot. If it takes you a long time to explain what the movie's about, it better be a documentary because nobody's funding it. And so what I think
Mhm.
the and this is a problem of academics who, quite frankly, when I read academic journals, I am so bored by most of them because they're just trying to demonstrate that they're smart. It's like, I know you're smart. I don't give a crap how smart you are. I don't want smart. I want effective. I don't care about smart. I don't care about vocabulary. I want effective. And you can only get with to the concept of being effective if you can sell what you're trying to, if you can actually market what you're trying to sell. And you're not going to market people by saying, well, empirically, nobody gives a shit. What they want to hear is broken windows. What they want to hear is invest and we'll all, we'll all make more money. That's what they want to hear. And they're not wrong. That is, we all have those goals. In capitalism, people want to make more money so they can have more stuff. That's what capitalism is. If you're looking at crime, you're looking to see that you feel safe. That's what you want to feel. You want to feel like you're safe. But to sell it as an empirical argument, no, just have the empirical argument for the policy wonks to understand why it's a good approach. But you start with a common
Yeah,
theme.
well, the policy comes into the
Well, I'm sorry,
politics.
say again?
Well, that's the problem. The policy and the politics are all wove in
Yes,
together really
absolutely.
too here. And what you just said there, I think this is my kind of, why I became a researcher. What I did, I worked at the Innocence Project for a number of years, freeing innocent people from prison
Yeah,
through DNA testing. A noble project that had no, right? We all believed in that, right? There should not be an
that's right.
innocent person in prison. And we had people who were conservative to, right, to Democrat. Everyone believed in the same thing. A lot,
That's right.
funders all alike. And we would bring the honorees out there, right? I've worked at the ACLU, had a mission of freedom for all, right? And that they're just constitutional rights and things that we believe in this country, right? And those are the missions that I always, think, even as a researcher, is that it's all about different perspectives too, right? And so when we think here, we have to come to the table and understand the different perspectives and put that in a way so that everyone can understand
Right.
what's really going on here. And I think that maybe gets to a better exchange. And as a researcher, that's what I do, right? I try to show the differential nature, how people in certain different circumstances. My whole dissertation was on the creation of marijuana, cannabis laws throughout time, and I show that, right, there's a time when white youth were being arrested for, and we made a law, right, to make it, somewhat decriminalize it, right? But in other instances, right, we didn't care. We criminalized, black and brown communities off this almost the same law and the same thinking that was created. Now we have to come to the table and think about that, right, in a similar way. And that's the real nature of it. That's tough in a country that's divided like here, and where people have different experiences where they may not, and think about policing, they might not experience any
That's
policing,
right.
right? But fear is not related to anything like that, and they want more policing just to get their safety, but it's not a reality. While others actually have to get get that type of policing there, right? And now is out there in their communities based on someone else's thought that had nothing to do, right, with their lived reality. And we have to understand that kind of perspective of it, right? And somehow come to wedge with it. Now that's my thing of empirical evidence, I'm saying. And I don't think that a different kind of lens, more creative folks, more people who are like movement, and there are people in the movements and other things, and even researchers who are trying to, delve in new realities and get in there and do the research. I think that matters, right? That'll give us those perspectives. Um, that can actually lead to us to, to a new way of thinking. And that's what I say. It's not about the names. I think people come in, whether it's defund the police or other thing, because there's a lot of great visionaries on there. And there's a way for us to actually use the ideas there to make us a
Right.
better
But between
society,
the,
I think, in the end, and to think about that through every lens
you're
of
right.
everybody, right? And a lot of times we focus as researchers on marginalized communities because their voices are completely left out, right? We know who the power brokers are. Most of the policing comes from powerful institutions who come up with these ideas, or just like broken windows because there's no evidence behind it, but people want to take it up and try it out, even though they know it's not going to work, but they know there's a
Right.
purpose for it, right? That it will get some type of control. Now, why don't we think about the other lens and try to bring that in? I think to a more balanced approach, right? And I think that's as researchers and even policymakers and bringing that into the aspect that's kind of more of a forward-thinking kind of approach. But I think in this kind of country, with the history we have here, um, we have to really think more about everybody. And that's the problem of it, right? It's always, you talk about capitalism, we're always about the few. But let's do, even from a research point, let's put everyone in that kind of category, come up with new theories, be inclusive, right, for all communities. And I think, and then just like we said earlier, that'll be better for us
And
all,
that's what,
actually, right? We
but
don't need more
yes,
communities marginalizing poor black and brown communities, because that's actually detrimental to
there's no
everybody.
question.
And actually,
And
it's,
so
it's
what,
just
but that's
not
where the
powerful.
messaging is so vital, because if we wrap a message into individual communities, marginalized communities. Okay. Well, the people who are not part of those communities don't feel like it's going to help them. And so why would they support it? Because we are all basically, first and foremost, we see the world from our own perspective. To say that I'm going to help somebody else is nice if I have the luxury of being able to help somebody else and not myself. But if I don't really feel like I've got the luxury to think about your problems because I got so many of my own, then you better damn well sell your community's needs as dovetailing with my community's needs. If you don't do that, you don't get my support. And the problem has been it's great to have empirical support that everybody gets helped. It's terrible to sell it as it's going to help specific communities. That is where the rubber is hitting the road. And
But you,
you know
but
that that's where actually this show is coming from. That's why I have a podcast, Edwin. It's because I know that my goals, which are empirically supported by people who are scholars like yourself, need to be sold to other people who are not hateful, are not dismissive, but are in pain themselves and want to make sure that if we're going to help you, we better be helping me. And the thing that's so frustrating is the stuff that where the empirical data supports, it actually does help everybody, but you can't sell it as helping specific communities and expect the non-specified communities to be that excited about it. You just can't. They ain't gonna. So to me, how we market
yes,
this stuff is the bottom line, because anybody what's happening by the policy wonks, that's a different, they don't want to get under the hood. Most people don't want to get look under the hood. They just want to be safer and have more money. That's what they want. They want security,
correct.
both financial and personal safety. That's what they want. And they want status. They want to feel good about themselves. They want to be productive. So if we can just sell it,
And that's a universal,
yes,
thing
that's
too,
exactly
right?
my
And
point.
but we have but the problem here is just now, and just in my final thoughts, is we have a contest. We have to think we have a contested society, right? And I think this is my point of it. It's very contested, right? We got people who don't even know what the poor people in a poor black neighborhood even undergo, right? People don't understand. They don't think there's racism. There has been a history of racism in this country, right? And I think we can't lock that doesn't happen. I think even here, right? And so we have a lot to do to put this on the table, and a lot of those people are movement builders and nonprofits to stick up, not to stick up for some of the work that they do. Is that they're just trying to get those voices out there because otherwise, right, we wouldn't hear about it. And they want to put the balanced voices, but first thing is putting your own voices and own situations
That's
on the
right.
table first, right, and having that recognized. And a lot of times
I
it's not
hear
even
you,
recognized.
but
Is
I
my kind of
know,
just point here. And then once we get there, we can have
but
the more balance of it, right? We can have it because most of the balance is not for
there's
those
no
communities.
question of who is marginalized, which marginalized communities and which people are heard. There's no question about that. But there's no way that you're going to get the non-marginalized community, or at least the groups that are not included as being the target beneficiaries. If they don't feel like they're going to benefit, they ain't going to join the party. And you know what? That's not their fault. That's the fault of the people who were trying to sell the idea. But listen, there is so much more I want to talk to you about, but we just don't have enough time.
Another
And
time.
so I can't you got to come back, as we're both learning. Maybe I'm right. What if I'm right? What if you're right? My belief is that there's a lot more right out there than people realize if we just give ourselves an opportunity to hear each other and to understand how much we overlap in our goals, in our joys, in our fears. And that's what this show is about. It is about trying to find a path forward with the people that seem to just want to hate each other. And it's just so frustrating for so many people who actually have so much in common to have so much hate. And it's gotta end. It's gotta end. It's got to end. And Edwin, with work by people like you and with voices like mine, I really do believe we can really make some headway into turning this around. I really believe that. Because if I didn't, why am I here? Right? So Edwin, I just got to tell you, I am so thrilled that you shared some time with me and with us, and you're coming back because I think I knew where you live. I don't know if I still do, but I'll find out. And I want you back. I miss talking to you, and thanks so much for being on What If I'm Right with Ian Heller.
No, and thanks a lot, Ian, for having me. And I hope I was right. I believe that in my heart, but always happen to have these debates, and we have a lot of other topics too that I work on that we couldn't even get into. But I'm happy, I think, to discuss policing,
Totally.
misdemeanors, crime, and everything we discussed. I think it was a interesting conversation, and so thanks, 11. Happy to come back
Excellent.
anytime you
Thanks
want
so
me to.
much, Edwin. Take good care. Hi, this is Ian Heller, and you're listening to What If I'm Right? This segment is called Shake Your Fist. Shake Your Fist is about ways in which individuals can make differences in our collective lives. That, yes, even one person can change the world. And what's really cool is that if more than one person starts to do stuff, the world will change. It will. But how do you do it? Well, that's what this segment is about. How do we shake our fist? Well, in the last segment that I put together, I told Barack Obama, start shaking your fist, for God's sake. You don't like Donald Trump? You're the man that can do something about it. In this segment, I'm turning it around. No, I'm not going to ask Donald Trump to change. He will never change. That's fine with me. But what will make Donald Trump's behavior change? If the people who support him, the real strong, staunch MAGA people, if you go out and you tell him I'm not happy. See, he doesn't care what I think. He really doesn't. I'm blue. No, he cares what red people think. That's right, you MAGA folks. Now, I'm not here to talk down at you like a lot of people do. I don't have any more or less respect for the MAGA folks than I do to the progressives. Quite frankly, everybody seems like idiots these days, and everybody's a genius these days. So as far as I'm concerned, we all have a stake in this. But I have very, very little impact on Donald Trump because he won't listen to me. I'm a blue guy for the most part. But red people, you guys could do something. Think about the things that he promised. Now, some of those things, quite frankly, I don't blame you for wanting. I really don't. In fact, I agree with a lot of the stuff you wanted. Yeah, we were having problems at the border. We really were. What happened under the Biden administration was a freaking disaster. And truth be told, I didn't really pay attention enough because I was supporting. I was blinding myself because I was really committing a great offense, identity politics. But what he did with the border, that was an absolute disaster. Well, what Donald Trump is doing at the border is an absolute disaster. But he's not going to listen to me, no matter how much I shake my fist. But people who support him, you are watching your friends, your family members, your colleagues, your co-workers. They're being arrested because the skin color is a little bit different. We shouldn't be arresting people based on phenotype. That's what race is. It's phenotype. It's Crayola crayon box. It's Martha Stewart color wheel. And yet, masked men, mostly, are knocking down doors and pushing people down on onto the ground and handcuffing them and zip tying them, and without any due process trying to ship them off to other countries like El Salvador. And those are your friends too. These are not just progressives' friends. These are people who are in the red and blue worlds, both worlds. They're our friends. Now, look, if you're going to ask me whether I think we should be better at making sure that our borders are more secure, you got my vote. We should have more secure borders. We really should. And quite frankly, if somebody comes into this country, we should be able to decide whether or not they're welcome. That's national borders. If one day it becomes a one world thing, well, that's another thing. But right now we live in a world of nations, which means that we have to have borders, and those borders need to be secure. And so, yeah, let's keep our border secure. But do we really have to intimidate and terrorize people who are living here just because they have an accent, just because their skin is slightly browner than ours, just because they moved here and wanted to make a better life for themselves, and they are tax-paying Americans now, and we're treating them as if we just want them to get the hell out of here? Those are our friends. Those are our doctors. Those are our workers in whether it's in the farms or the factories. If you, as I, know that this administration is treating immigrants poorly, unnecessarily poorly, shake your fist. You're the MAGA people he might listen to. When the government got shut down. Now look, for the most part, there's a slight edge in the number of people, according to the polls, who believe that the Republicans are more responsible for it. But by and large, it's pretty much people are basically in agreement based on their ideology. If you're a Democrat, you tend to think the Republicans are at fault. If you're a Republican, you tend to think the Democrats are at fault. However, the one thing that we actually all agree on, almost universally, is that healthcare should not be held hostage. People should not be waking up in Georgia, whether they're red or blue, to a health insurance bill that's twice or three times as large as the one this past year. My goodness, Marjorie Taylor Greene, not a person I tend to agree with very frequently, but she's the one saying, this is crazy. My son can't afford to have health insurance. Now look, I understand the hypocrisy. I know that she was very much opposed to the Affordable Care Act and wanted it repealed. Doesn't feel that way now. Why? Because it hit home. And it's hitting home to people red, blue, purple, green, every color in the rainbow. Every Crayola crayon is impacted on this one. Oh my God. Can you imagine going from having to pay, let's say, $1,000, which is inexpensive, $1,000 a year, to $3,000 a year? What are you not going to pay? What are you not going to pay for now? Your mortgage? What are you not going to pay for now that you have to pay a lot more in health insurance? You're going to stop buying the medication you need to stay healthy? You're going to stop driving to work now because you can't afford the gas? What are you going to cut back on? And this is completely non-denominational. It is non-partisan. So folks, I've got no way in hell that I'm going to be able to reach out to Donald Trump and he'll give a crap what I have to say. He's very partisan. Okay, we still got to affect change. So I'm looking to my friends across the aisle, some of whom hate me, others not so much. But for every person here who is a supporter of Donald Trump, I'm not asking you to change your support. I'm asking you to use your power, to shake your fist, to tell Donald Trump, we wanted you to do what you said you were going to do, and now you're not. We want to hold you to your word. That's part of the art of the deal. We made a deal. We'll vote for you if you do something for us. And you said you were going to do something for us, and you're not. It's time to keep your end of the deal. And the only people who can hold his feet to the fire, the only people whose fists, when they shake, might actually have an impact on Stephen Miller and Russell Vogt and Donald Trump are the MAGA people. So if there's something you don't like the way ICE is enforcing things, like ACA subsidies being cut back, like inflation going up, even though we were promised that everything was going to be cheaper, and now we have all sorts of economic hardships as a result of things like tariffs, it's time for you to shake your fist and tell him, no, that's not why we voted for you. Shake your fist. This is Ian Heller. What if I'm right?